Are you one of those people who just absolutely cannot stand the torture of having to wait until the appropriate time to unwrap a present? You know what I'm talking about? Sometimes a gift or a card is received in advance of the event for which it is given, maybe for your birthday or an anniversary or your wedding or Christmas or something. And you get that gift a little bit before the time. Now, some people have no problem simply setting it aside and waiting for the occasion for which it was intended. But then there are those other folks. Do you know those other folks? Those people who find that kind of a situation kind of a slow and cruel form of torment. Kind of like hearing about chocolate mint ice cream this time of the day. There are those people that find that situation hard. They just have to know what is inside that envelope or what is underneath that wrapping or tissue paper, and the sooner that they can get away with finding out, the better off, in their opinion. So I'm kind of curious about you today. How many of you would say that you are the content to wait type? You get a gift, you can wait till the time, not a problem. It can sit there for a month if need be. Not too many of you. So how many of you are the overcome with curiosity type? If you get it, you'll open it or check it out. All right. Vast majority of you have never received a gift in your life. I'm sorry. I want to assure you that the gift of salvation is available to you. You know, in the family in which I grew up, we were pretty evenly divided on this thing. For example, at Christmas time, my mom and I, growing up, we just enjoy seeing the beautiful gifts under the tree and the glow of the lights. Just happy to have them there. We neither of us have any desire to know the contents of our gifts. We don't even try to guess because we want to be surprised when we open them. My mother is pathetic. You can show her, this is the gift I'm going to give you tomorrow. Wrap it up, and the next day, she has no idea. Completely clueless about what the gift will be. But for my dad and my sister, it's a completely different story. For them, the mystery of what is wrapped in a gift seems to present some kind of a pressing challenge that must be addressed immediately. And they would happily know what is concealed not only in their gifts, but in everyone else's gifts as well. They are much more inclined to handle their gifts and shake their gifts and smell their gifts than anything they can do to increase their chances of guessing the contents. They got into this thing as my sister got older, that my mother and I put an official ban on. They would be sitting there like, so what do you think's in that gift? I'll give you $10 if you can guess what's in that gift. And we're like, just stop this, we want to enjoy it. But my father and my sister are not nearly as bad as one of my aunts. It is just an understood and accepted fact in our family that if you give her any presents in advance, they will be investigated. And sometimes she would try to hold out for a little while, but sooner or later she would find not only the opportunity, but the need to find out what's on the inside. When I was growing up, I used to wonder, what's the point to this? I would wonder, why does my mother bother to wrap up Auntie Kathleen's gifts? Why do you waste your time? Why don't you just say, here's the gifts, here's some wrapping paper, when you're done, you wrap them and be done with it. But as I've gotten older, I suspect that in reality, I think my aunt actually enjoys the whole process. I think she likes that deal of finding out there's nobody in the house and stealthily going in, locking herself behind some door and unwrapping the gifts to see what they are and then carefully wrapping them back up so that all of us, she thinks, will think that she has never opened them. So no doubt for her, the growing use of gift bags over the years has probably greatly enabled her in her addiction of curiosity. Maybe it's taken the fun out of it for her, I don't know. Well, today my intention is to draw our attention to a gift. And I have some good news for all of us today. Nobody has to wait to unwrap this gift. So go ahead and let your curiosity run rampant because the time to open it, the time to explore it, the time to use it is now. We can find this gift presented in the Bible. So if you've got access to one, tear into it carefully and find the very last chapter. Last chapter of the Bible, Revelation chapter 22. The back of the Bible, except for any study notes you might have in there. If you've got a paper copy, Revelation chapter 22, verse 10 is the one we're looking for. At least it's the one I'm looking for. I hope you'll join me. Verse 10, Revelation 22, verse 10. What's happening here? An angel who had been showing John some of the things that he had been seen in vision is talking to John here in this verse. So we're jumping into the middle of it. The angel is talking to John. John writes, "And he, the angel, said to me, 'Do not seal the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand.'" So as this wonderful revelation from Jesus draws to a close, the instructions of the angel to John are very clear. He says, "Do not seal the words of the prophecy of this book." This phrase, "the words of the prophecy of this book," which are also found a little bit earlier in verse 7, indicate that apparently God intended that this revelation given to John would be recorded and taken as one whole connected unit. They weren't just separate miscellaneous things put together in some kind of a mosaic. The various scenes and sayings and symbols were all a part of one overall connected prophecy or message. It was a gift from the Lord to his people. And the angel is saying, don't seal up this gift. Leave it unwrapped. Now, these instructions here in Revelation 22, verse 10, provide, I think, an interesting contrast to some instructions that were given to another prophet of God at an earlier time. That is the prophet Daniel. We go back to Daniel 8:26, after receiving the vision about the 2,300 days and the cleansing of the sanctuary. It's interesting, there Daniel is told to seal up the vision, for it refers to many days in the future. And then again in the last chapter of Daniel, the following words are recorded in chapter 12, verse 4, which kind of reiterate the point. It says, "But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end." So some parts of the message from God that was given to Daniel, some of those parts, Daniel was instructed, were to be intended to be sealed, to be wrapped up, to be set aside, to be saved till a later time. These prophecies were not intended to be unwrapped and understood until a later time. But that was not at all the case with the revelation that was given to John. That prophecy was not supposed to be sealed up and set aside like some kind of a secret or mystery. It was intended to be openly given to God's people right away. If you think about it, sealing is really about separation. A seal provides a barrier that keeps one part closed off from or separate from another part. In the winter, remember the winter? It's coming. We're almost at the longest day of the year, and pretty soon we're on our way to winter again. I see you're happy about that. In the winter, we may do things like seal off doors and windows to keep the warmth in and to keep the cold out. It separates the two, so the cold air doesn't get in and mix with the warm air. We seal canned fruits and vegetables to protect them from the air getting in and spoiling them. The seal separates the food on the inside of the can or jar from the air on the outside. We seal an envelope to keep the contents on the inside and to keep unwanted parties on the outside. And God seals his loyal people to separate them and protect them from Satan and his followers. So I think it's interesting to note as we look at this message from Revelation, as we look at this idea that it's to be open, to note that there are a few things in Revelation which are sealed up. Can you think of any of them? Just in your mind? Some things that are sealed up. And one of them is one that I just mentioned. Chapters 7 and 9 both refer to the seal of God being on the foreheads of the saints. And in that symbol of spiritual sealing, the loyal followers of Jesus are set aside. They are separated and distinguished from the rest of the people. So that's one thing that's sealed. There's a seal of God on his people. Then in chapter 10, verse 4, we come to something else in Revelation that is to be sealed up. And why don't we go there and take a look at it in our Bibles? It's kind of an interesting thing. It's a unique thing. Revelation chapter 10 and verse 4. There's kind of really nothing else like this in Revelation. Revelation chapter 10, verse 4. Things that are sealed in this open book Revelation 10, verse 4, it says, "Now when the seven thunders uttered their voices, I was about to write," John says, "but I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, 'Seal up the things which the seven thunders uttered, and do not write them.'" It's interesting. This was apparently the one part of all the things that John saw and heard, the one part that he was not supposed to write down for us. Do you wonder what it is? Ever read that and wonder? Well, I do. Maybe you haven't. Isn't that terrible? I was going to write it, but then, I guess I won't, because God said not to. So if you're curious about that, you're just going to have to contain your curiosity and wait until you get to heaven. You can ask John, what did those thunders say? I want to know. I'm curious about that. Another thing that is sealed. And let's move to another instance of sealing. It occurs in Revelation chapter 20, verse 3. So you see there's not a lot sealed in Revelation. There's God's people, these one little message from these thunders. We're already in chapter 20. Revelation chapter 20, verse 3. Very interesting, something else that is sealed in Revelation. Revelation 20, verse 3. It says, "And he cast him," that is Satan, "into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years were finished, but after these things he must be released for a little while." So interestingly enough, here it is, of all things, Satan who is sealed. God's people are sealed. In other ways, Satan is also sealed. He is depicted as being sealed off from everyone for 1,000 years, separated from the people that he has made it his practice to deceive. Now that's a package you don't need to be in a hurry to unwrap anytime soon, right? Just keep that one wrapped up. So there are these few things that are sealed up in the book of Revelation. But Revelation 22, verse 10 is assuring us that the message of the book of Revelation is not one of those things to be sealed up. It was never intended to be closed up and sealed off. God does not want his people to be separated from the truth and the assurance and the warning and the guidance and the instruction and the encouragement and the information that is revealed in Revelation, that's provided there. Revelation is to be and is an open book. It's open to everyone because we all need it. Nowhere in Revelation do you find even a hint that this prophecy was intended just for a privileged few, maybe just for a special class of academics who could somehow decipher all of the codes and the mystery in it. There's nothing about that in the book. Nothing that would indicate they would only have relevance in the far-off future, so just ignore it for now. Both at the beginning as well as at the end of Revelation, we find clear instructions from God intending to show that he intended that this prophecy is to be open and accessible and understood by his people. In fact, the book begins with these words, as we heard earlier, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants. Notice that the revelation does not start with something like this, the cover-up of Jesus Christ, the mystery of Jesus Christ, the secret of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to hide from his servants. That would be a whole different story, right? This is a revelation, something that God reveals to his people, not something to be hidden, not something to be stashed away in mystery. And then you get to verse 3 of chapter 1. There's a blessing pronounced on the ones who read here and keep the things written in the prophecy. So God clearly expected that this prophecy would go to his people so they could be exposed to it, so that they could follow its counsel. And in fact, in verse 11, John gives some clear instructions in this regard. Christ gives John some clear instructions in this regard, telling him, what you see, write in a book and send it to the 7 churches which are in Asia. John wasn't supposed to just keep what he saw locked away in his memory. Oh, that was a nice thing you did for me, God. He wasn't supposed to write it down and keep it private like some kind of a diary. He was supposed to write it out and then send it on. So that message is at the beginning of Revelation, and then you get to the end of Revelation. It's interesting what it says, the beginning and end of things. The last chapter of Revelation, those intentions for the prophecy are reaffirmed, maybe just in case we missed it the first time around. Verse 6 confirms that God sent his angel to show these things to his people. Verse 7 repeats the blessing on those who follow that the prophecy says. Verse 16 refers again to the message going out to the churches. And in verses 18 and 19, Jesus gives a final warning about the importance of this revelation, which is to everyone who hears the words of the prophecy of this book. Without a doubt, the Lord intended that this message would be made available to his followers. And that's why the angel says in verse 10, do not seal the words of the prophecy of this book. Seems pretty clear, right? Pretty straightforward. What, Pastor, were you talking? Isn't it pretty clear? Like, I don't know, it's over and over and over again, right? Pretty clear. Yet I don't know about you, but I have met and known Christian people, good Christian people, people who have been born and raised as Christians, lived their lives as Christians, who have been taught all of their lives that Revelation is a sealed or closed book. Have you ever been taught that? Have you ever met people who have been taught that? Talk to more people. People have been led to believe that Revelation cannot be understood, and in fact, you shouldn't even try. It's kind of a wise and unwise, unfoolish endeavor to go about. In fact, there are people who are actually afraid of Revelation. Ever met even Christians? Have you ever met Christians that are afraid of Revelation? Like, don't read any verses from there. Just leave that closed. Not supposed to touch that. That's real. Some find all of the symbols kind of cryptic and confusing, and so they just avoid Revelation. Just easier. Leave it alone. Others think that Revelation is not really important or relevant, so they simply ignore it. So now think about this. If God's clear intention and plan is that Revelation would be open and that it would be available to people so that they can read it and they can follow it, and if that is the case, which it clearly says, the beginning and end of it, then who is it who would want people to be afraid of Revelation? Who is it that would want people to be confused by it? Who would want people to avoid it? Who would want people to just ignore it? Who would be behind interpretations of Revelation which assign it all to historical events in the far distant past, leaving it to mean that there is basically no relevance to us today? Or who is it that might be behind interpretations that put it all to the unknown events? Your guess is as good as mine. In the future, sometime in the future, maybe, I guess we'll figure it out when the time comes. Who might be behind things like that? Who would want to keep people separated from the important information and assurances and warnings of God contained in this prophetic book? Who do you think that might be? You're way ahead of the first service crowd. Don't tell them. Said that? Yeah, seems kind of obvious, doesn't it? The angel says over and over and over and over and over again, this is a revelation, I want people to know it. So who's going to be behind all of the things that get people to think that it shouldn't be open? Obviously Satan, not God, who wants to keep Revelation under wraps. Satan who wants Revelation sealed up. Now, why was it that John was not supposed to seal this prophecy that he was given? Well, if you go back to the text we began with, Revelation 22:10, the angel says why. He says, for the time is at hand. That same statement was already made in Revelation 1 verse 3, which said in that case, for the time is near. And it's interesting that the word, the original Greek word there that's translated in the version of the Bible I have here today, the New King James Version, in one place it says at hand, and one time it says near, but it's the same word. It's the exact same phrase. So what time is this talking about? What is it that is near at hand? Don't seal it up, for the time is at hand. What time? Well, I don't think we have to guess. If we return to Revelation 22, we can find the answer if we just read on in the next couple of verses. Got it there still, Revelation 22. Let's read from verse 10 again so we can put this together. Revelation 22, verse 10, and he said to me, do not seal the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. What does it say next? He who is unjust, let him be unjust still. He who is filthy, let him be filthy still. He who is righteous, let him be righteous still. He who is holy, let him be holy still. And then look what it says. And behold, I am coming quickly, and my reward is with me to give to everyone according to his work. So right after this statement that the time is at hand, we have a description of the close of probation and the second coming of Jesus Christ. Verse 11 is describing the end of the judgment in heaven when the ultimate destiny of every person has been settled. And then just a short time after that, we have a depiction that Jesus returns to this earth to separate the saved from the lost based on that judgment. So I believe that this is that this time that's being described in verse 10 as being at hand, the time at the end of the sinful world when probation closes and Jesus returns. That's what it's talking about. The time is at hand. And in Daniel, if we look at this, I think there's an interesting parallel to what we have set up here in Revelation verse 22. It's kind of the same and different. You know, in Revelation 22, 10 and 11, we have this command not to seal the prophecy, this statement that the last days are near, followed by a description of the two ultimate groups of people on the earth, the righteous saints and the lost wicked. Don't seal the prophecy, time is near, two groups of people. Now, let's go to Daniel chapter 12 and compare what it says at the end of that book and that prophecy. Go to Daniel chapter 12, look at verses 9 and 10. I think it's kind of interesting. Daniel 12, verses 9 and 10. Look at how this one ends. Compare that to what we've just read in Revelation. Daniel 12, verses 9 and 10, it says, and he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Then look what it says next. Many shall be purified, made white and refined, but the wicked shall do wickedly. And none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. So it's interesting. Here you get to the end of Daniel, and really you have the complete opposite, don't you? Here in Daniel it says the prophecy is to be sealed because the last days are far off in the future, and yet, interestingly enough, right after talking about that, again you have a description of the two ultimate groups of people on earth, the righteous saints and the lost wicked. Daniel says, seal it up, not yet, long time, there's going to be two groups of people. Revelation says, don't seal it up, the time is near. Here's the two groups of people. You see, part of Daniel's prophecy was sealed because the time of the end and the time of the final wrap-up of this world's history was still far off in the distant future. But the revelation that was given to John was not to be sealed because the time, the end was now near. This idea that the consummation of Earth's history is close at hand is repeated several times in Revelation. This isn't a one-off statement, particularly again in the first and last chapters. Chapter 1, verse 1 says that the revelation shows things which must shortly take place. Verse 3 states that the time is near. In chapter 3:11, Jesus says, behold, I am coming quickly. And then you get to the end of it again. Chapter 22, verse 6 reaffirms that this prophecy shows the things which must shortly take place. Verses 7 and 12, the words of Jesus are repeated, behold, I am coming quickly. Verse 10 again notes that the time is at hand. And then verse 20, Jesus proclaims, surely I am coming quickly. Through Revelation, from beginning to end, you've got this sense that the time is here. And yet we might wonder, how can something that is near be so far away? Right? Wonder that? I mean, how could the end be near in John's day when we're still here now today, 2014, after all of this time? How does that work? Well, I think we need to understand that apparently, as I understand this, God, I believe, set a fairly broad range of time in which the Lord's return could occur, depending on the response of God's people to the opportunities and responsibilities that have been given to them. So I believe that God has said, and only He knows when that span of time ultimately began and when it will ultimately end. And so to a certain degree, within that range of time, Christians can hasten or delay the second coming of Christ. The timing of the promise then is somewhat conditional on us. Since God knows the future as well as he knows the present, as well as he knows the past, he obviously knows exactly when probation will close. He knows exactly when Jesus will return. But I think it bears repeating and keeping in mind that even though he has this foreknowledge, I believe that God has always chosen to relate to his people on what I would call the basis of the best case scenario. In other words, he relates to his people, he relates to us based on what he would like to happen. He relates to us based on what could happen if our wills were to be in harmony with his will. So ideally, I think that Christ would have been happy to have come back long before this. Why is God waiting so long? I don't think it's because, he didn't get around to it yet. But the thing is, he won't force our wills just to get what he would like. And so his message to the people of John's day was that things were going to wrap up soon because things really could have wrapped up soon. He wasn't just dangling a carrot in front of their nose, Well, I'll just kind of do that to keep them going and keep them engaged. He wasn't just playing mind games with them. Oh, I'm not really going to come soon, but I'll just tell them that because it's better for them. But I'll just mess with their mind. That's not it. Yeah, he knew that time would carry on as long as it has and as long as it will. But that, I think, is one of the most neat and amazing things about God. He doesn't let his foreknowledge of reality get in the way of approaching us, relating to us from the perspective of challenging and encouraging us with the hope of what would be possible if we chose it and really wanted to follow it. Aren't you glad God is like that? God could have said, my people, they're nice sometimes, but what a lost cause they are. And it's going to take forever, and they're not going to follow the program like it could have been. So, you guys there's no hope for you. Just wait, just hang on a little bit. It's going to be a long time. Just give up. He could have said that to us. He doesn't. Instead, he relates to us. Even though he knows what it's going to be, he relates to us, I think, as we would want to be related to, based on the basis of what could and should happen. He relates to us from the perspective that we have a choice to respond to him or not. I think that's amazing about God. If I knew the future, I don't know if I'd bother to do that if I was relating with you. I'd just be like, you know what, it's not going to happen, so just leave me alone. God doesn't do that. Pretty cool, I think. So the time really was at hand back in John's day, and it still really is near now in our day. And of course, there's also a very practical side to this, right? The time for the close of probation, when you will have made your final choices about your ultimate destiny. Truth is, that is no longer than your lifetime. And how long is your lifetime going to be? Anybody know? Don't, do we? We always talk about the proverbial bus. You walk out of here today and get hit by a bus. I don't know why it's always a bus that takes us out in these scenarios. It could be a truck, whatever. Since none of us knows the length of our lifetimes, on a very personal, individual level, time really is now and near, right? Time really is near. Don't worry about 1,000 years, because you're not going to live 1,000 years. You see, this revelation was given to John in the Christian era, which means that the life, death on the cross, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ were now in the past. These were the major events that secured the provision for salvation and sealed Satan's doom. So now the next big event, the thing that Christians from earliest times have been encouraged to focus on and look for and long for and hope for, is the return of Jesus to put an end to the sorry history of this sin-saturated world. Christ's return is not the end of the story. There will still be the closing scenes of the battle with evil to follow, but his return is the next big thing. The next major turning point which brings a dramatic change to our existence. Humans have had a few of those, right? Humans were created. From creation to the fall, that was like an era, an epoch of human life. And then sin came in and things changed. And you've got from the fall until Jesus Christ came. That was a period of time. Then Jesus Christ died and rose again, and salvation is secure and Satan is doomed. Things changed. And we're in the next period of time. And yet, things change from day to day, but the next big thing that brings a change to humanity, when Jesus Christ comes back. So we're in this period of time. And it was for people living in this special time, this time between the cross and the second coming, that revelation was given as a gift from God. And it's in the context of a view toward the close of probation and the return of the Savior that it is stressed to us here that the time is at hand. We're living in the time where the next big thing is Christ's coming, so the time is at hand. It's an appropriate statement. You see, revelation wasn't just given to John to amuse him and help him pass his time there on the island of Patmos. Are you bored, John? Here, I'll show you a movie. It was given by God to Christians as a gift of love and grace. He gave it because Christians need the instruction, and we need the warnings, and we need the encouragement it contains to help prepare us to be able to stand happy and holy when Jesus Christ comes back. During the time that we lived in Saskatoon, I was contacted by a man named Erwin Buck. Nice man. It was a pleasure to get to know him. He was a professor at the Lutheran Theological Seminary there at the University of Saskatchewan. So he called me up out of the blue one day, and he requested that I come and present to one of their seminary classes how Seventh-day Adventist Christians approach the interpretation of the Bible, particularly focusing on how we interpret apocalyptic prophecy. Yeah, so some pastors are like salivating at that opportunity. I was like, oh, Lord. So I went to my conference president, Elder Weeb, and I'm like, sure I said it nicer, but you will be coming with me for moral support, which he was kind enough to do. And then I did all the talking, and I'm sure he wondered why he was there. It was good to have him there. So interestingly enough, this Mr. Buck, this Professor Buck, was one of the Lutheran scholars who participated in a 4-year, friendly scholarly dialogue between Lutheran Christian scholars and Seventh-day Adventist Christian scholars. And they did this thing, the idea being that both sides would be able to come to a little clearer understanding of the beliefs held by the others. They weren't trying to convert each other, but they would meet from time to time over 4 years and write papers and present those papers and discuss. And, it was a friendly thing that happened. And so the various papers which were presented at those 4 years of conferences had been compiled and published as a book. So to help the students prepare for my presentation, the students in that seminary class were given a copy of 2 chapters of that book to read. One chapter was one written by their professor, Mr. Buck, Professor Buck, who presented the Lutheran viewpoint on interpreting biblical apocalyptic prophecy and literature. And then the other chapter they was given was one written by one of my seminary professors, Pastor Washman's seminary professors, John Pauline, who you may have heard of or read. And his chapter outlined the Seventh-day Adventist approach to biblical apocalyptic literature. And so he sent me a copy of each of those chapters so I could read what the students were at least supposed to read before I came and presented. And you know what? Reading those 2 chapters and then adding to that the experience of going and talking with that class really just helped me to better appreciate what a treasured blessing we have in the Bible's book of Revelation. I learned that based on some of Martin Luther's evaluations of Revelation, Lutheran Christians officially tend to assign Revelation to kind of a subordinate position in the Bible. And so Buck concludes his chapter with these words. He said, "There is much to be gained from a detailed exegesis of the apocalypse. It is a pity that Lutherans and others have neglected this valuable resource for so long." Isn't that good? But he continues, "Nevertheless, Luther's assessment has also preserved Lutheranism from excessive fascination with speculations which tend to lose sight of what is central in the gospel." I thought that was interesting. But for Seventh-day Adventist Christians, the book of Revelation has been given a prominent rather than a subordinate position. We understand Revelation to be strongly linked to the rest of the Scripture. We don't see it as sidelined from the gospel. We see it as a key component of the Bible. The teachings and prophecies of Revelation provide a significant background and foundation for many of our beliefs, as well as for our mission as a movement. Honestly, you take away Revelation and we're kind of left just floundering like, ooh, why are we and what do we do? As Pauline notes in his chapter, giving the Adventist perspective, he said, in many ways, Adventist interpretation of the last book of the Bible is at the heart of Adventist self-understanding and identity. So, what's the big deal about Revelation? Why is it so important? Well, let me try and summarize that for you in a couple of paragraphs. Might be a good experience for you to try sometime. Try to write down in a few sentences, summarize the essence of Revelation. Here's my shot at it. What does Revelation do for us? I would say the book of Revelation provides us with a general outline of the time from the days of the early church until the return of Christ and beyond. It reveals the ongoing battle between God and Satan, between good and evil. And it depicts God's ultimate victory along with Satan's ultimate defeat in complete annihilation. Revelation reminds us that we are all involved and caught up in this battle and that we must choose which side we're going to stand on and support. What does Revelation do for us? It assures us that all through it, God sees what happens to his people and he never leaves them. It encourages us with descriptions of the blessings that those who remain loyal to Christ will ultimately enjoy. What does Revelation do for us? It warns us of the judgments and final destruction to come on those who choose to side with Satan. It reveals that Satan will use miracles and work through religious as well as political entities to deceive and pressure people. What does Revelation do for us? It makes a number of things, I think, clear. That allegiance to God is important. That salvation is only possible by accepting Christ's sacrifice on our behalf. What does Revelation do for us? It makes clear that faith in Jesus and obedience to his commandments are important. It shows us that in the end, it's not just an everybody feels good, everything and everyone is okay, do what you want program. It doesn't really matter because we all end up in the same place at the end kind of a deal. It says, Rather, in the end, Revelation portrays a situation of religious and political powers joined under Satan's control to oppress and seek to destroy and obliterate God's true, obedient, and faithful people. That's important stuff. What does it do? It shows that God ultimately steps in and delivers his people and that they will then enjoy eternity with him. A lot of stuff in there. So Revelation provides us with a very important general understanding which helps us to prepare for and navigate through the final events of this earth's history. It's filled with important truths and warnings and encouragements and instruction and guidance and hope and information. Ellen G. White, one of the pioneers of this movement that became the Seventh-day Adventist Church, wrote this. She wrote, "If our people were half awake," it's very tempting for me as a pastor to stop right at that point. But I will read on. If our people were half awake, if they realized the nearness of the events portrayed in the Revelation, a reformation would be wrought in our churches and many more would believe the message. That's from her book Evangelism, 195. You know what? I have many books. Some of the poor deacons of this church who helped unload the moving van that cold January night in 2011 can attest, as they're still traumatized, that I have way more books than I know what to do with reading. I may not have as many books as Pastor Roshman. I think he has a lot of books too. I don't know. We'd have to have a book-off competition this sometime. But here's the truth, and here's maybe where the difference is. The vast majority of my books I have never read. Pastor Roshman probably has. I have never read. I got lots of books, man. And you know what? I think about, where I am in life and my age and my life and my schedule, and unless I start to feel compelled to read at 3 a.m, I'm not going to read most of those books. I'm not. Carl had prayed about the joy of hearing the birds. I'm so thankful I got our air conditioning fixed yesterday so that I can close my window and not hear the birds at 4 o'clock praising God, because I'm not in a praiseworthy mood at that time. I'm not going to read most of those books, I don't think. In fact, I have quite a few books that are still wrapped in their original cellophane. Remember cellophane? Do they still wrap books in cellophane? Probably not, right? Because you get them electronically. No, these are like books wrapped in that clear plastic. They're in there safe. Man, they're protected. I've got a lot of books still in their cellophane, yet to be opened. And they're in good condition. They are not dusty. They are not moldy. There's no pages bent, corners dinged, no markings on them. They are looking good in their cellophane. But the truth is, they really can't be of much benefit to me other than as paperweights, as long as they remain in that pristine condition, right? All of those books in the cellophane that I've never read, they haven't done me much good yet. Revelation 22:10 is saying that Revelation is meant to be unwrapped. It's a call to open up this book and expose yourself to its teachings and guidance. In your spiritual life, if Revelation is still sealed up, if it's still wrapped up in the cellophane, so to speak, I got to say to you, it can't do you any good. If you're waiting for some grand opening, some big unveiling, waiting for a flyer in the mail that it's, they're going to open up Revelation, sorry to tell you, but I've got some news for you. It's too late. According to Revelation 22, verse 10, Revelation is already unwrapped. Don't wait for the grand opening. It's already open and ready for business. As a Christian in these days, when the time is at hand, you can't afford to leave the book of Revelation sealed up, because it plays an important role in helping to prepare us for the close of probation and the return of Jesus Christ. Because the time is near, the time to read and study it is now. Ellen White put it this way. She said, "We are to proclaim to the world the great and solemn truths of Revelation." Now, obviously, we can't do that if we're not familiar with what those truths are ourselves. Then she continues with what I find to be some very encouraging words in regard to Revelation. She said, "A benediction is pronounced upon those who pay due regard to this communication. The blessing is promised to encourage a study of this book. We are by no means to become weary of looking into it because of its apparently mystical symbols. Christ can give us understanding." Evangelism 196, 197. I like that. Christ can give us understanding. Revelation Unwrapped, it's a gift of God to help you be ready for the final wrap-up, help you draw closer to Jesus. You know what? I don't know everything about Revelation. One time, I know it's late, hang on, we're really close. Less than one page, be of courage. One time I was preaching in a church where my parents were. I was preaching from Revelation, and I said something about I don't know everything. I don't know everything about what this means. A lady stood up and said, "You don't know, Pastor, but I know. I know what it all means." And she was about ready to share it in detail, and they kind of asked her to sit down. And afterwards, many people came out and they said, "Oh yes, she knows everything, about everything." But I don't think she knew quite as much as she thought she knew. I don't know everything about Revelation. I don't fully understand the significance of every single little intricate detail in that prophecy, but I know enough about it that I do want to commend to you this book of the Bible. I don't have to proclaim to know every single last sentence to say that this thing is worth it. What Christ has revealed in Revelation is of important spiritual value. You see, in a nutshell, what Revelation is really about is calling you to fully and wholeheartedly choose to accept and follow Jesus Christ right now. So what I really want to say to you, what I really want to ask you today is this, and that is, how is it with you? How is it with you? Are you tight with the Trinity? You know what I mean? Are you fastened to the Father? You joined with Jesus? You stuck to the Spirit? How is it with you? Are you good with God? Are you in love with the Lord? Savvy with the Savior? Linked to the Lamb? Connected to the King? How is it? Because the time is near at hand, that means that the time is now to respond to the message and the call of Revelation. And as I think about Revelation 22:10, and as I think about the overall message of the book of Revelation, There's a song that I have always, for some reason, really liked that just keeps coming to my mind. One of my all-time favorite songs. You might be like, what? From the 80s. Whew. Recorded back in 1985 by Debbie Boone. Lyrics written by Stormy Amartian, words written by Michael Amartian. I don't really care too much if you like or don't like the style of the music, but I think it has an important message about Jesus Christ, who he is, why we should connect with him now. Now. The song is called The Time Is Now. I want to invite you to listen to the words. Sandra is kind enough, even though she's pretty well lost her voice, to sing this for us. Franker and Octavian have been kind enough to prepare to play it. It's not an easy song to play. But as you listen to it, I want to invite you to respond in your heart and your mind to the call to Jesus, to receive him and to receive all that he offers right now. And if you've already accepted and you're already following him, then I want to encourage you to take this as an opportunity to reaffirm your commitment to him. And if you haven't yet accepted and fully committed and surrendered to Jesus, then I want to urge you to consider that the time is at hand, which means that the time to receive him is now, or it's too late. People stood in the baptismal tank today and showed that they had made that decision. There is no better time, so if you haven't accepted him yet, I simply want to say to you, what are you waiting for? Time is now.